let me show you a coin I found. It's bronze, it's small, it was struck over 2000 years ago in Alexandria, while Cleopatra was alive and sitting on the throne. On it, you can see a profile of her face, a strong hook nose, a jutting chin, hair pulled back into a bun. The British Museum which owns this coin says it's one of the only portraits of Cleopatra they have, because everything else we have about her was found after she was long gone. So here's the question this entire video is built around. Is this really her? Is this the face of one of the most famous women in history? Or is this small piece of bronze part of the same problem we're about to spend the next several minutes untangling? Because here's the thing, most people think they already know what Cleopatra looked like. Movies, paintings, and pop culture have given us an image about her. Dramatic eyeliner, a gold headdress, a face borrowed from a Hollywood poster. But almost none of that comes from our own lifetime. And the honest answer is that nobody, not historians, not archaeologists, not museum holding pieces like this coin, can say for certain what she actually looked like. So let's start as we uncover this mystery. The first problem is timing. Cleopatra died in 30 BC. The two ancient writers who wrote about her appearance didn't write a single word about her until long after that. The Greek writer Plutarch wrote his account around 100 AD, roughly 130 years after she died. The Roman historian Cassius Dio wrote his around 200 AD, more than 2 centuries later. Neither of them ever saw her, and neither of them ever spoke to anyone who had. So the obvious next question is, did anyone who actually lived alongside Cleopatra leave behind a description of her? Well, as far as we can tell, no. The Roman politician Cicero, who actually met Cleopatra in person in 44 BC, he wrote about her afterward, but only to complain about her arrogance and the debt she owed him. He never described what she looked like. The poet Horace wrote about her shortly after her death in 30 BC, but his poem was Roman victory propaganda, calling her a deadly monster rather than describing her face. So here's where we actually stand before we've even gotten to the coin, the bust, or anything else. There is no surviving description of Cleopatra written by anyone who saw her in person. Everything else, every account, every image, was written and brought to light long after she was long gone. If nobody who saw her left a description, the next best thing would be the writers who came closest in time and at least agreed with each other. However, they didn't agree with each other. Plutarch, writing around 100 AD, made a specific claim about her looks. He said her beauty was not the thing that would necessarily strike someone who saw her, and that it wasn't, in his world, incomparable. Instead, he said it was the conversation with her that had what he called an irresistible charm, describing a sweetness in her voice and her reportedly ability to switch between many different languages depending on who she was speaking to. That passage is one of the most quoted lines in this entire debate, often used as evidence that Cleopatra's real power came from intelligence and charm rather than physical beauty. However, Cassius Dio, writing roughly a century after Plutarch, described Cleopatra as a woman of surpassing beauty, and went even further, framing her beauty as one of the tools she deliberately used when she first met Julius Caesar. And then there's a third writer who usually gets left out of this conversation entirely, the Roman poet Lucan. Now, Lucan wrote his accounts around 65 AD, about 95 years after her death, which actually makes him closer in time to her than either Plutarch or Dio. Lucan linked hard in the opposite direction from Plutarch, repeatedly describing her beauty as a dangerous and even comparing her to Helen of Troy, the woman blamed for starting the Trojan War. So this was supposed to be our first real shot at an answer. Two writers, all describing the exact same woman. One says her looks weren't the remarkable thing about her, and the other two built the entire portrait around how beautiful she was. None of them ever laid eyes on her, and the written records on its own cancelled itself out. So if the writers can agree, this is where the coin from the beginning is supposed to save us. Unlike Plutarch, Dio, and Lucan, this coin was made while Cleopatra was alive, in a mint she controlled. Coins like this one were struck in Alexandria and on the island of Cyprus during her reign. So is this really it? Is the case closed? Well, not quite yet, because even the specialists who studied this coinage point out that the portraits vary noticeably from one issue to the next, particularly in how the nose is drawn, with some coins showing a sharper hooked nose and others a softer profile. One specialist analysis of our coin portraits state directly that the coins may not be an accurate reflection of her real face, and there's a reason for that. On coin minted during her political alliance with Mark Antony, Cleopatra's portrait was deliberately designed to resemble his, a common practice meant to visually signal unity between a king and a queen. Antony's own coin portraits show an even more exaggerated hook nose than Cleopatra's do. So some of what we are seeing on coins like this one may not be a neutral record of her actual face at all. It may be a face adjusted to look more like her husband's for political messaging. Well, now the coin that was supposed to be our most solid piece of evidence just became our second contradiction. If a coin minted in our own lifetime can't settle this, the next logical place to look is in the marble. Two busts, one in Berlin and one in Vatican, are widely treated in museums and books as the portraits of Cleopatra. But here's the problem. Neither of these busts has Cleopatra's name carved anywhere on them, and their identifications as her comes entirely from comparing their facial features to the same coins that specialists already admitted were inconsistent. And history shows how easily these identifications can go wrong. A statue at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, catalogued as possibly depicting Cleopatra VII, actually has a cartouche carved into its arm, spelling out a name in hieroglyph. Except the museum's own record described that cartouche as possibly a modern addition, and note that it's even oriented incorrectly. The granite bust at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto has been reassessed by different experts multiple times over the decades, with one Egyptologist describing its expression as dry, blunt, and non-committal, and saying there's a mystery in the face that nobody has been able to resolve. A bust found in Churchill in modern Algeria was confidently labeled as Cleopatra for years, until scholars reassigned it to a daughter, Cleopatra Selene II, instead. So even among professional archaeologists, identifying Cleopatra's face has been a track record of getting it wrong and then changing the answer. And this isn't just something that happened decades ago, because it's happening right now. In 2024 and 2025, archaeologists excavating a site called Taposiri Magna, west of Alexandria, uncovered a marble bust that the excavations director suggests might depict Cleopatra. But Egypt's former antiquities minister publicly disagreed, arguing that the bust style was Roman rather than Egyptian. Two senior experts looked at the same object within the last 2 years and reached opposite conclusions, which tells you this debate isn't some old academic disagreement that got settled long ago. It's still wide open, still today. So at this point, writers disagree, the coin isn't consistent, and the bust keeps getting reattributed. Is there anything left that isn't in dispute? Well, there's one image, and it comes with its own catch. On the outer wall of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera in Egypt, There's a large carved relief showing Cleopatra alongside her son, Caesarion, both depicted as Egyptian rulers making offerings to the gods. This is the largest surviving image of Cleopatra anywhere in the world, and nobody disputes that it represents her. But Egyptian temple art like this follows strict visual conventions that had barely changed in over 1,000 years. Pharaohs, regardless of their actual appearance, were carved in the same symbolic style, representing their role rather than their individual features. So while this image is clearly labeled as Cleopatra, and is the one thing in this entire investigation that everyone agrees is her, it tells us almost nothing about what her actual face looked like. Therefore, we finally found an image with no arguments attached to it, and it turns out to be the least useful ones of all. There's one more layer to this though, and it became a major public argument in recent years. What did Cleopatra's ancestry actually look like? And was she Greek, or was she African, or something else? Here's what's actually documented. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, belonged to a dynasty founded almost 300 years before her by a Macedonian Greek general who had served under Alexander the Great. That side of her family is well recorded, but her mother's identity was never recorded at all, which means that roughly half of Cleopatra's ancestry is factually unknown. In 2023, this gap became the center of a public debate after a Netflix series cast a black actress to play Cleopatra, and the reaction split sharply between the people insisting she was Greek and people pointing to the possibility of African heritage. For years, one piece of physical evidence had been cited in arguments about this: a skull found in a tomb in Ephesus, in modern-day Turkey, once thought to belong to Cleopatra's sister, Antony IV, and used to make inference about the family's appearance. But in a study completed in 2025, researchers using modern scanning and DNA analysis found that the skull didn't belong to Antonius at all. It belonged to a boy, somewhere between 11 and 14 years old, with a development disorder. A piece of evidence that had shaped this debate for over a decade turned out to have nothing to do with Cleopatra's family whatsoever. After all this, the contradicting writers, the inconsistent coin, the reattributed balls, the stylized temple carving, and a debunked skull, is there anything else that connects us directly to Cleopatra herself without an argument attached to it? Well, I think there is, and it isn't a picture at all. In Berlin, there's a fragment of papyrus dated to 23rd of February 33 BC. A tax exemption decree granting trade privilege to a Roman officer connected to Mark Antony. At the bottom of that document, written in different handwriting from the rest of the text, is a single Greek word, ginestoi, which roughly translates to "make it happen." Several papyrus specialists believe this word was written by Cleopatra herself, as a personal approval of that order. If that's true, this isn't an image someone made of Cleopatra decades or centuries after her death. It's something Cleopatra actually held a pen to and wrote while she was alive, and it's the closest thing to her that still exists, but it tells us absolutely nothing about her face. So let's go back to where we started. That small bronze coin struck in Alexandria in Cleopatra's own lifetime. After everything we've gone through, here's what we can honestly say about it. It's not a fake, and it's not centuries removed from her like Plutarch or Dio. But it's also not a neutral photograph. It's a piece of political messaging made to project an image, sometimes adjusted to resemble her husband's face for the sake of unity, varying from issue to issue in ways that specialists themselves admit may not reflect her real face. It's the best evidence we have, and it still isn't enough to give us a confident answer. And that, in the end, is the real answer to the question this video sets out to answer. Cleopatra was one of the most powerful and well-documented political figures of the ancient world, and her face is still one of its open mystery.